My topic for today is making Bible class A+. And that was hard for me because I know some of you, and I know that you are all more qualified to speak about this than I am. And so I'm going to kind of approach it from the topic of, here's why I'm not qualified to speak about it, here's what I did wrong. And truthfully, I think that I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, and I think that maybe I'm going to give you some things to think about that you haven't thought about, but I'm going to tell you a lot of the things I know that I'm supposed to do and I may or may not do them. I know how to teach a good Bible class. I don't always do those things. I teach at Marcel. I teach Spanish. Just to give you a little background on me. I teach 10th grade in the morning, and I teach elementary Spanish in the afternoon, and in the middle I teach girls' Bible. And I teach, right now I'm teaching 7th grade girls' Bible, teaching the book of Acts, which is totally a new subject for me to teach. Obviously I've studied it before, I've never taught it. Last semester I taught 6th grade girls, and I taught them the book of James and Great Women's Bible. That was also new to me. So I've had to learn a lot in the last few months, and it's a totally different thing when you're teaching a Bible class every day for 45 minutes a day. So a lot of these things I needed reminded of because I don't do all these things every day. It's really hard to give a great Bible class 5 days a week for 45 minutes a day. That being said, I'm going to do the best I can with the topic. It was a little vague to me whether I was supposed to gear this toward teaching children or ladies' classes, but I tried to just pull together some things that are common no matter what you're teaching. So maybe we'll get some knowledge that will help you both. First thing I want to talk about is, what do you remember from when you were a child in Bible class? Here are the things I thought of. You had the little flannel board lesson, and then you got the junky crayon box out with all the little nubs and all the wrappers were torn off, and you got some kind of coloring sheet from the 1940s. Maybe if you had a really awesome teacher, you got the little duplex cookies. Maybe you only got those at VBS. I don't know. And for holidays, you got to make the handprints for VBS. Those are all good things, and I'm sure you all have, if you went to church when you were little, you probably have good memories of those things. Some people still use those things, and that's okay. Why did those things work? Why did those things work to teach you Bible lessons when you were a kid? Let me back up and show you again. Why did those things work?
Appeal to the senses.
Appeals to your senses, yes. And I have that as the next slide. Is you can look at it one of two things. It can either appeal to the educational theories that you learn. Either you have visual learners, so you're giving them something to look at. You have auditory learners. You're telling the story, so they're hearing something. You have kinesthetic learners. Maybe they're learning from color in this picture. So you have all those different learning styles that are being appealed to. Also, if you want to break it down a little more, you're appealing to your senses. You got seeing, hearing, tasting, touching. Probably not any smell unless you sniff your cookies first. But you're appealing to these different things. That's why that worked, and why it would still work today. I think that the problem is that some people still use just those things. And that may work, but there may be more to it now than just doing those things. So I'm going to give you some things to think about. And I'm going to start with just giving you some advice. And these are all on your outline. My first piece of advice is to consider the master teacher. And that would, of course, be Jesus. And I think this is the best advice. If you don't take anything else away from here, think of this. What made Jesus the master teacher? It's right there for you. He was a storyteller. And I want you to think for just a minute about when you sit on a Sunday morning and you are listening to a preacher. Maybe you're listening to a preacher that you don't particularly enjoy hearing. What happens when he starts to tell a story? You start paying attention again. You may be way off on the beach in the Bahamas having a little mental vacation, but when he starts telling a story, your attention comes back. Jesus knew that. Jesus knew that when you start telling the story, people start listening. So, you've got to tell the story. You've got to tell the Bible story. You've got to be prepared to give the story, and you've got to tell other stories. There's nothing wrong with telling people a story. I know that there are elders in the church who think that you shouldn't tell a lot of stories when you preach. For one thing, we're not preachers. For another thing, I think that storytelling is biblical. That's how Jesus taught. So I want to look at, sorry, I'm really scattered. Much of the Bible is written as stories, and Jesus taught literally dozens of parables. I looked it up last night, and I just did a quick search. One source said 40 parables, one source said 57. I just left it at dozens. There are also Bible stories all throughout the Bible that tell relevant stories. Now, how do you know about David and Goliath? It's written like a story. You've heard the story. You learn that way. Another thing about Jesus, he gave a needed break. What can you think of that I might be going with this? Any idea? Luke 9, 10 through 17. Luke 9, 10 through 17. Let me give you a rundown here. I'll just read it real quickly. On the return, the apostles told him all they had done. And he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida. When the crowds learned it, they followed him, and he welcomed them and spoke to them of the kingdom of heaven, and cured those who had need of healing. Now the day began to wear away, and the 12 came and said to him, Send the crowd away to go into the surrounding villages and countryside to find lodging and get provisions. For we are here in a desolate place. But he said to them, You give them something to eat. They said, We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we're to go and buy food for all these people. For there were about 5,000 men. He said to his disciples, Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. And they did so, and had them all sit down. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing over them. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. And they all ate and were satisfied, and what was left over was picked up, 12 baskets of broken pieces. Jesus realized sometimes your audience needs a break. If you are ever teaching a class, you kind of know when people need a break. You can kind of start seeing the attention start to give away a little bit. I know this a lot because sometimes I'm really boring. And I look out and I see the kids just starting to fidget. And every now and then I'll say, you know what, y'all just stand up for a minute. Just stand up, move around a little bit. So Jesus knew that sometimes people get hungry, sometimes people get bored, and he stopped. He stopped and said, they need to eat. Let's feed them. So you need to be aware that sometimes you need to give people a break. Okay, number 2, know your material. Here we go. I want to do something that I know you all love. Do you all have your class books with you today? Let's start on page 36. Read with me. Is there something worth giving up everything else just to have and hold? Christ teaches this, that there is such a gift, and the Apostle Paul seemed to have found that priceless treasure. Matthew 13, 44 and 45, Philippians 3, 4 through 8. It's not as impossible as you think. So God, okay. Have you ever been in that class? Probably recently. It is so boring. It is so boring to sit and listen to somebody read out of a book. You all know that. They know it too. I have a theory on that. My theory is the reason people read out of the book is because they don't know the material. And I do this a lot when I teach my 10th graders how to do a presentation. We go through this whole thing, and I'll tell you what I do. I say to them, y'all give me a topic of something that you think I know about. And they'll say, hamburgers. And I'll just stand up there and impromptu speak on hamburgers for 3 or 4 minutes. And I'll just rattle off everything I know about hamburgers. And then I'll say, okay, now let's go to Wikipedia, which is a little scary because you never know what's going to come up on Wikipedia. But I'll hit random articles. And it'll always come up with something like the Battle of Wuxi, Chinese, Shanghai, whatever. It comes up with some obscure, crazy article that I know nothing about. And I'll say to them, if you make me do a speech on that topic, I cannot do it without reading it to you. So if you know your material, you're not going to read it. You're not going to be tied to notes. You're not going to be having to, the reason people read the material is because they don't know what they're talking about. They haven't studied it enough. If you have studied everything you need to study and you know your material like you should, you're not going to be tied to a book or notes. You're going to be able to step away. You're going to be able to just talk about it. So first thing about this, do your homework. Don't just grab your book and highlight and then just read your highlight notes. And I've been guilty of doing that before. I say all this because I've done it. Usually when I get an assignment like for a ladies class, and almost always when I've had assignments for ladies classes, it's been tied to a book. And I'll usually just read the title of the book, and then I set the book aside. Then I do my lesson. Then I pick the book back up and fill in with what she talked about in the book. I almost never use the book much at all, except, you know what, here's a really good point that she makes, and I'll fill that back in with what I've already done. But if you just start with the book and highlight, your audience is going to be bored to tears because they can read. If they have a book and you're reading to them out of the book, what do they need you for? They can read their own book. So know your material. Read your lesson. This is another thing I have learned to do with having 6th and 7th grade Bible class. Read your lesson with questions in mind. And I'll give you the example here. I did this last week. I have 7th grade girls right now, like I said, and you know as well as I do, middle schoolers they're not known for wisdom. They're not known for really applying their mind to things. They want to say, oh, this is hard. So a lot of times you have to read like they do. You have to think the way they do. And so I was teaching last week on Acts 10. Come on, Bible students, what happens in Acts chapter 10? Cornelius? Okay. So the first verse of Acts chapter 10 says, at Caesarea there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort. Now, I know what a centurion is because I've been reading this for years. They don't know what that is. So when I read that, I have to stop and think, what is the question a 7th grade girl is going to ask right there? What's a centurion? What's the Italian cohort? So I made sure to write those down in my notes. And when I put my PowerPoint together, I made sure to address those things because I know what they're going to ask or what they're thinking. They may not have enough nerve to ask. It takes a lot of courage when you're in 7th grade to go, oh, what's the Italian cohort? So, you anticipate what people are going to want to know when you read your material. Next bit of advice I have on this is seek out smart sources. I am not an expert on anything. And so when I do a lesson, I know there are people who know more than I do. And I make it a really strong point to go and find those people, find what they've written. An example would be I had to do a lesson one time on depression. I'm going to refer to that a couple of times. And so I asked my father-in-law, Shirley said to me, my mother-in-law, he's a counselor, so I went and asked him, what would you say about this? Do you have any material about this? Because he knows more than I do. So be sure and look for people who know more than you do and use what they have to say. Use caution, obviously. Use caution when you find sources. They don't all have to be, you don't always have to use a source from the church. People in other religious groups are smart too. And sometimes they have good insight on things. And if you say, I'm only going to use members of the church in my lesson, well, you're going to probably miss some good sources. So don't be afraid to use other sources. Just use them with caution. So are there any comments so far about knowing your material, or anybody have anything to add there?
It helps if you're teaching a small child's class. Don't just sit there. David and Goliath. David was a little short guy, and Goliath was be animated. Goliath was tall, and David was short, and be excited, and don't just do it in a monotone anywhere, even teaching anything.
Well, and going back to knowing the material, sometimes the opposite's true. Sometimes you know the material so well that you can't get excited about it. You've heard the story of David and Goliath so many times that you can't imagine what it would be like if you were hearing it for the first time. But you may be teaching it to somebody who's hearing it for the first time. And imagine how amazing that story would be to them if you present it like it's the amazing story it is. So, don't get to the point where you're making things stale either. Okay, the next bit of advice is know your audience, and that kind of goes with what you were saying. If you're talking to children, you're obviously going to present a little differently than if you're talking to 60-year-old women. That's a different audience. So you have to be aware of your audience's strengths and limitations. But truthfully, a lot of the things you do with children work with ladies too. And that's just the truth. And I know that this morning Jeannie talked about dumbing down and that kind of thing. Don't need to dumb down our message, but sometimes you need to present your lesson, the presentation, and I don't want to say dumbing down at all. Sometimes the presentation needs to be simple, and you need to take into account that ladies have a lot of the same limitations that children do. Adults have the same limitations. We have short attention spans. We need to be engaged. We need to be really thinking. So be aware of that. If you are teaching children, they need activity. They need hands-on. They need excitement. They need things that don't take a lot of listening, because kids don't listen very long. I see this. I have Spanish classes in the elementary for 30 minutes a day. Each class 30 minutes. And usually if I want to talk to them, I can talk to them for about 5 minutes. And then I better have something else up my sleeve. I better let them stand up. You know, they love to, we stand up, we play Simon Says, or we have a song, or we do something to kind of break it, because they cannot concentrate very long. You know, adults are a lot like that too. If you are just going to stand up and lecture to someone, it's not going to last long. They're going to be making their shopping list. They're going to be thinking about lunch. They're going to be doing something else. So ladies also need activity and hands-on things. So you've got to appeal to people's senses. You've got to keep things moving, keep activities changed. Know and understand that people can't focus on something very long. And this is me. If the preacher goes too long, I don't care how good his lesson is, I'm ashamed to say it, and my mind starts wandering. And I don't want it to. I want to focus, but it's really hard. I'm going to show you all this video here. And this is just a clip of the video. The video is actually about 10 minutes long. I think the clip's about a minute and a half. And this, hopefully it's got volume. Does it have volume? No speakers. Let's hope it plays.
One of the problems is, a recent study shows that by the time a boy is 21...
Hang on, let me introduce this a little bit, tell you what this is about. This is about how kids have changed, and this is actually geared towards school. But the concept is the same when you're teaching children in Bible class. This explains kind of a problem that we're going to start facing in church too.
Simply developing among boys in America, literally dropping out of high school, college, and it's not simply poor performance. One of the problems is, a recent study shows that by the time a boy is 21, he has spent at least 10,000 hours playing video games alone, probably more watching pornography alone. And you put that together, it means A, they haven't learned social skills, emotional, social intelligence, but also it means that they live in a world that they create. They're playing Warcraft, they're playing these other games, which is exciting. In fact, I just heard the other day that these game companies are now going to develop 3D games so that the world will be all around you. Their brains are being digitally rewired, which means they will never fit in a traditional classroom, which is analog. Somebody talks at you without even nice pictures. Meaning it's boring. When you control nothing, you sit there passively. And if you want to change the curriculum, I understand the traditionalists here say we're going to go back to reading, writing, arithmetic. Disaster. These kids will never fit into that. They have to be in a situation where they are controlling something, and school is set up, you control nothing. You're passive. School is all about learning, the way of gratification, literally endlessly. All addictions are addictions of...
So, what does that mean for a Bible class? I'm not trying to get this big of the screen. Completely down here. Okay, let's try that. There we go now. We may have to back up. So what does this mean for a Bible class? It means that The kids that you're teaching have changed. The message hasn't changed, but your audience has changed. And, what worked for us doesn't work for them. You can't just expect them to be excited about a coloring sheet because they are playing with stuff that is so much more interactive than that. And I'm going to use Brennan as an example. Last night, Brennan, Lori's 2-year-old little boy, was playing with my iPad, and I was amazed, absolutely amazed, because it would say next, and he knew what to click. He knew which button to click to make it go where he wanted it to go. He can't read, but this 2-year-old knows how to use that technology. And so we bring him into Bible class, and we're wanting to tell him the greatest stories in the history of the world, and we want to slide him a coloring sheet. And, coloring's fun, but these kids are used to so much more interaction that maybe we're going to have to start changing the way we teach them a little bit. Not every church has the capability to bring technology in. I love technology, and I use it every day in my classroom. I have a smart board, and we play smart board games, and we do all these things. And I can tell you that if I stand up and talk, they'll listen to me for a few minutes. But if I put a game up on that board, something that they can really interact with, they're going to play, and they're going to pay attention, and they're going to get very, very competitive. But you've kind of got to start changing the way you present, because kids have changed, and the way they operate has changed.
Even that video that you showed just a minute ago, the guy's talking and doing a lot of statistics and all that, but it's all these graphics and things are moving around to keep our attention.
Can you imagine seeing something like that 20 years ago? We'd have been blown away. It's amazing that hardly impresses us anymore. And I'm not saying, I want to make this little caveat here. I know that people say, well, we're not here to entertain. Well, I understand where they're coming from, but I also understand that if you want these kids to be involved in learning about God, you're going to have to talk to them on the level that they're used to being talked to. And ladies too, adults too. I mean, I do stuff like this, and so if somebody stands up and reads to me out of a book, I'm not engaged. I'm not used to this anymore. I've gotten past this. All right, I'm going to move on to the next point, and it is put yourself in your lesson. Now, you may think, well, apply it to yourself. That's not really what I mean. I really mean this. I'm going to tell you a story first. One day, this preacher went to this house, and he knocked on the door, and he could hear people inside, okay? And he knew somebody was in there, but nobody came to the door. So he gets out his little business card, and he writes Revelation 3:20 on it. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come to him and eat with him and he with me. Sticks at the door. Okay, he thinks he's pretty clever. So the next day, he's at church, and the lady who he was going to visit comes by, and she gives him a little card. And it says Genesis 3:10. I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. Okay, thank you for the courtesy laugh. You've all heard it before. That's my point. I can stand up here, I try to think, what is the joke I've heard the most from preachers? And that was it. You can stand up and tell a standard preacher story, and people will laugh because they're polite. But it's so much better if you put some of yourself into your lesson. And don't just don't just type in stories about depression. Think of a story that apply it to yourself, because people want to hear from you. The gospel is personal. The Bible is personal. Your lessons about the Bible are so much better if you make them personal. And this is a little clip that I did on a lesson, because I really believe in this. I'm okay with making fun of myself. I'm okay with telling you the stupid stuff I did. I'm okay with that. I did a lesson on forgetfulness at Pleasant Valley. And again, it was that whole thing where, here's your book, do your lesson out of the book. I didn't do my lesson out of the book. I did my lesson, then I went back and added from the book. But I started out my lesson by saying, I'm forgetful. I am forgetful. I forget things all the time. And for 2 weeks, I took pictures of everything I forgot. And I put these on there. Those are my toes. And I said, I'm so forgetful, I forgot to paint my toenails, and then I wore sandals, and my nasty toenails were showing, okay? I'm so forgetful that I borrowed that book from my coworker, and I carried it around in the car for 2 weeks, forgetting to take it back to her. And I finally got it into the school building, left it on my desk for another 3 days. Here's something else I forgot. Shirley, look away. You gave me that plant. Forgot to water the thing. It sat there and just starved on the porch, but it's better now. It's recovered, I'm glad to say. You probably can't see that one very well, and it's probably a good thing. That's a fish frying skillet. I fried fish one night, and the oil was too hot to clean up, and I left it sitting on the stove, and I forgot to clean it up. And I got up the next morning, and there it was. And if you could see it, you would see how disgusting it is, because it has a tail in it. Yeah, it's really bad. So when you put something personal in a lesson, people are more interested. You know, you're not really interested in that old joke that somebody looked up on the internet and you've heard 20 times before. You are interested in what your speaker is telling you their experiences with the topic. So don't be afraid to give personal examples. I did mention I did a lesson on depression, and when I was assigned that topic, it kind of hit close to home to me, because I went through a bout of depression, like full on depression at one point, and it was when I moved to here the first time, and I was 21 years old, away from my family for the first time, coming to Heritage where I didn't know a single person in this entire state, except for my in-laws who lived 2 hours away. And I went through a really hard time. So when I did the lesson on depression, it would have been really easy for me to talk about, here's what it is, but because I was able to say, I have been here and I've done this, and here's what happened to me. And I told them point blank, you know, there were weeks where I didn't get out of my pajamas except to go to church. And Travis would come home and he would say, what have you done all day? Because the house was a wreck. And it was hard for me to say. I slept till 11 o'clock, and then I got up and played Tetris all day. And I played so much that when I closed my eyes, I could see the little Tetris blocks falling down. And so when I did this lesson on depression, that's a hard thing to say. To say, you know, here's something I have been through, but because I was able to tell them my experience with it, I had a lot of people come up and say, you know, that meant so much more to me because I know you understand. And I did. So don't be afraid to use your own life, your own examples, and your own personal stories in the lesson. It makes things so much more personal and meaningful to people. We all want to hear stories, and it's so much better when it's your story. So don't be afraid to use your own life. You know, there are some things you don't want to use, that's fine. But if it's something you can share and it's relevant, you need to be willing to share it. Okay, how y'all doing? Doing good? Okay. Here we go. Brain break time. You may need a piece of chocolate. You may need to stand up or stretch.
That's what you said.
Take a quick nap.
Yeah, take a nap. I'll come back to you, Charlotte.
Well, thank you. I'm on the way once you're done. Again.
I know they send me an email every day because they think I need to be on it. Okay. Thank you. Want 1, 2, 3, many you need? There's almond and regular. I'm going to can the almonds. You want some? No? Which one are the almond ones? Gold wrappers. Gold for grapes.
I like it. All kinds.
Maybe you can just smell that chocolate giggles. Yes. I'm sure you would. You gotta eat little puffs. Sorry.
Okay, we'll get to that. You want 3?
I need to
I'll
walk.
take a whole bag.
Okay. I got 3.
That brings me to the next point. Give brain breaks. You know, when somebody's been sitting listening to you for a long time, it's okay to stop and say, okay, everybody stand up and stretch, or everybody, you know, let's do this for a little while. You need You need to change your activities sometimes. Sometimes you need to give people a chance to give their brain a rest and maybe even stretch your legs. I do, because I do deal with children, I know that this is true of children. I have my high school classes for an hour and a half at a time, which is a long, long, long time. So if I stand up and I want to just teach them a new concept, I realize that my teaching a new concept better last about 10 minutes. And then I need to give them some practice. And that better last about 10 minutes. And then I probably need to stop that and say, let's go over that. And then we need to go on to something else. And then I probably need to give them some kind of activity that lets them get up out of their seat and go find a partner. Or you have to change activities a lot, especially with children, because they get bored so easily. I looked this up. I'm sure y'all know. What is the attention span for adults on average? Like that you can actually just sit and focus on something? About 20 minutes. And
TV show.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And you get breaks in there, right? You get the commercials to get up and go to the bathroom and get a drink. But our classes at church are 45 or 50 minutes. So if you're going to only have them for 20 minutes, first order of business is put your most important stuff right up front, because you're probably going to lose them. Or put some up front, give them some kind of break to kind of give them a rest, and then bring them back and start over for another 20 minutes. Children, I read this, that 2 to 5 minutes times their age, I think that would have to tap out somewhere before 20 minutes anyway. So children's a lot shorter attention span. So you have to let kids get up and move around, switch activities. They're not going to focus, and adults aren't either. So don't expect to stand up and lecture and keep your audience for 45 or 50 minutes. It's not going to happen. And I don't care how great you are, what a good speaker you are. I'm not that interesting, and I know it. So I try really hard to give a break. And usually, I remember when I did the lesson on forgetfulness, I stopped talking for a little while and I gave them a memory quiz. I put a bunch of pictures up there and I gave them 1 minute to look at all the pictures, and then they wrote them down, everything they could remember, and I had a prize. They were adults. They were ladies from ages 20 to 80. And that seems very elementary, but it served a purpose. It wasn't just about being fun, which it was a good, fun thing, but it also gave them a break and helped me bring them back. My caution on this, though, is if you don't have some kind of structured activity or transition, especially with kids, you're going to have a really hard time bringing them back. And with adults, too, because they'll start a conversation, you get up and want to start talking again, and they want to finish the conversation. So if you're going to give a brain break, be sure that you keep it kind of structured and don't let it go very long, because you'll lose them again. Any comments or questions so far? My next one. This one's a little scary. Children's Bible class. Don't be afraid of discipline. I don't mean grab that kid up by the ear and take them out and beat their tail, which may be what they need. Can't do that, obviously, but there are things that you can do. And you need to be willing and able to do those things when it's needed. I've been the rounds through this, because I know anybody who's ever taught a children's Bible class has had this experience where you get the little brat that cannot sit still, will not sit still, doesn't want to do anything, complains and whines and cries and carries on, and you can't get anything done. You've got 5 kids sitting there being good and 1 kid who's taking all your energy. And you're neglecting the education of these 5 to deal with that 1. I had an experience in McDougal, Arkansas. You know who I'm talking about. Her name was Rebecca. Little girl named Rebecca. And she was a cute little girl, but she was a stinker. And it was one of those little congregations where when you start teaching, you never get out. It's a life sentence. So I was in this life sentence with kids from like kindergarten through 8th grade, all in one room. Rebecca she was a handful. And it was every week. We were going round and round. And I remember that she would get in her chair and she'd purposely kick the chair over and fall on the floor and make a big scene and try to get everybody to laugh. And this went on. And I took her chair away from her, made her sit on the floor. I tried everything. And that worked. Worked for a little while. I said, if you can't sit in a chair, don't sit in a chair, sit on the floor. And she didn't like that, so that worked for about a week. Finally, one day, I just had it. And the classrooms were at the front of the auditorium. Her grandma was sitting right about where Shirley's at right now. And I went to open that door, and I said to her grandma, I said, Rebecca cannot behave, and I'm done with it. And she said, let me have her. Then I felt bad because I could hear grandma out there beating her. And I thought, whoo, I shouldn't have done that to that poor kid. Don't be afraid to discipline them. Like I said, you can't whip them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if they can't behave, you remove them from the room and you take them to their parents, or you get somebody else to take them to their parents, or whatever it takes, because you can't give one child all your attention. And they need to be removed and disciplined by their parents, and then they come back when they behave. Another experience I had with this, and this is out at Pleasant Valley, so I won't say the name because some of you probably know him. This little boy and I had a boy and a girl in the same class that never had any discipline, ever from anybody in their life. And I remember one time before church started, it was about 10 minutes till, and they were both there early. You know, I needed an extra 10 minutes with them. So I went to make copies, and I came back, and they were on the table. And they were fourth graders on the table. And I had to get a little stern with them. And I took the little boy out in the hall, and I had a really good talking to him. And everybody always told me I have a hard time with him. After I talked to that kid and told him, here's what I expect, and here's what's going to happen if you don't do what I expect, I'm going to take you out in the auditorium, and you're going to be embarrassed in front of everybody because you're getting treated like a kindergartner, and I'm going to get your grandma, and we're going to take care of this problem. And when he saw I meant business, I didn't have any more trouble out of him. But they will test you. So you've got to be prepared to discipline when you need to. Anybody have any experiences with that? I'm sure that you probably have more than
It
I
always helps when one of yours is in the classroom.
You're usually the ones that are
Because like where we are, this small congregation, and my three boys are sort of, they're always in one of my classes that I'm teaching. And my 6-year-old one time, he was being a little more rowdy than he should be. And he's not usually the one that's causing the problem, but this particular time he was. So I said, you know what? I've had it. You go sit on the front pew, and his daddy was teaching the adult class. So I said, you go sit on the front pew of the adult class. And so he went out there, and all the adults were like, uh-oh, and his daddy gives him the look, and he doesn't stop. And that nipped that in the butt. I was like, and all the other kids were like, So.
And I never intended to embarrass a kid, but if that's a needed byproduct of it,
I've often told
helps.
teachers that if they could put my kid in the corner in the auditorium as you don't have to do anything to them. But that's a major thing for kids to have to go out in the auditorium.
Sometimes you just have to let them know you mean business. And I'm not afraid to go get your parents, or I'm not afraid to go get your grandparents, or whatever. But I'm sure you've all had experiences like that. Okay, I've got a couple more points here. I'll try to get through them because I'm almost out of time. I really messed this up. Okay, next point, make your lesson relevant. This one is a hard one to me because, you want to teach the Bible story, and you want to say, here's what Jonah did, here's what happened to him, and you want to just leave it at that. But that is a great thing. It's great for them to know the Bible. However, take it a step further and give them some application. I was running through this with Tristan last night. We were talking about this, and she told me, she said, the difference between knowledge and wisdom is application. That out of my 17-year-old daughter's mouth, and I said, that's good, I'm going to steal that from you. So you can have knowledge, but if you don't know how to apply it, there's no wisdom there. And our goal for children and adults is to bring about wisdom and knowledge. So you've got to make your lessons relevant. Even if you're teaching little bitty kids, if you teach them about Jonah, how can you make that lesson relevant to them? You just say, Jonah got swallowed by a big fish. This is really cool. Well, yeah, it is really cool. And you can do a lot of cool things with that. But how can you make it mean something to them other than just knowing the story? What would y'all say?
Jonah disobeyed God. He was punished and will save us.
Okay? I'm going to take it a step further. What, if you have 7-year-olds in your class, what do you need to tell them about them obeying God? obey your parents, don't lie. Talk about the things that are relevant to them and about how this applies in their lives, because, you can tell them all about Jonah. They think that's cool, but you have to stop and say, here's why we're learning this story, because you want to be pleasing to God, and you want to obey God, and the things God expects of you are not to lie, obey your parents, be good and kind, take it a step further and make the lesson relevant to your audience. Trying to get my place here. All right, trying to hurry through these last few points, because one of my points is hurrying through the last few points. Number 8, have a destination with your lesson. This is a big one for me, because sometimes my destination is just what the book tells me it is. Tell the story of Jesus being born. Okay. But if you are focusing on making your lesson relevant like that, then you should have more of a destination than that. You should have some kind of goal, some kind of something you want your audience to get out of your lesson. Okay, here's what I'm going to talk about. Here's what I want them to learn from it. So you've got to have a place that you want to get to in mind, or your lesson is going to seem like you've just gone around in circles. So make sure that your lesson has a direction. Know what you want your audience to get out of it, and make your lesson go that way. If I want you to get to this point, but I turn this way, I'm never going to get you here. So get the goal in mind and make sure your lesson is written and designed to get to that point. Very, very important. When I taught about the depression lesson, I told you that that was a very close topic to me, because I had been through that. And I went through that, and I struggled through it myself. I didn't know what had really happened to me until I was out of it. So when I talked about that, I wanted to make the point that, it's okay. It's okay that sometimes you feel sad, or sometimes you feel more than sad. And the book that they gave me, the main topic in that lesson was Christians don't get depressed because they have the joy in God. They have the joy in Christ. And I took that lesson, and I don't believe that. I believe Christians get depressed because life is hard, and life hands you things you don't want to have. So my point in that lesson was to say, it is okay if you're going through this, and you don't have to be ashamed, you don't have to be afraid to get help. And so everything I talked about led to that point. So you need to be sure that you know where you're going with it, and get there. Which brings me to my last point, which is be flexible. Sometimes you have this place you want to go, and somebody gets you off on a different topic that's really important, and you might need to be flexible and go off. And that happens a lot with middle school girls, that we'll talk about something, and one of them will ask a question, and it leads off into something that's hurting them right now, something pertinent to that age group at that time. So you have to be able to say, sometimes there's something more important. And we went through this recently too. We were talking about some things, and one of the girls said, we've been talking about Acts, and one of the girls stayed after class and said, we're really having a problem with gossip and bullying, and we really need to stop, and we need to talk about that. So the next day, I took my lesson, and I said, we're going to get back to Acts. Right now, we're going to talk about how you treat each other and how we interact. So we took about 3 days to talk about that. But in your lesson, sometimes you look at the time and you go, you know what, I'm out of time, and I haven't gotten to these main points. So be sure you know what your biggest points are, and if you're going to have to cut something out, cut out the lesser points. The same thing is true the other way. What if you're teaching a lesson and you realize, I've got 15 minutes and I'm out of things to say? Wow, then what? You better have some activities or conversation topics or some kind of something in plan to go to as an emergency. Because if you're sitting with a room full of 10 third graders and you run out of stuff to do, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. So you need to have some kind of backup plan. And in fact, on my desk at school, I have worksheets copied that are like Bible trivia quizzes, so that if ever we finish early one day and we need something to do, I can pull those out and say, okay, here we go. And it doesn't even look like that I'm unprepared, because they think I prepared that. They think that was my plan all along. Okay, I'm going to finish this up because we're out of time. The thing I'm going to finish with is this, on the bottom of this sheet. Be the teacher you want to have. You know what you appreciate and don't appreciate in a class, and what you appreciate and don't appreciate in a lesson. And if you are bored to death when somebody reads out of the book, don't be the teacher that reads out of the book. If you just hate when somebody stands up and drones in a monotone voice like this, don't be the teacher that stands up and drones in a monotone voice. If you like having something to look at, give people something to look at. So that's my final advice. Whatever you like in a lesson, that's what you need to be when you teach. Anybody have any comments, questions? Yes,
I
ma'am.
do. When I've taught classes before, and it's usually been children, I don't feel very creative, but I can copy anybody. And so it was fun for me to take the lesson every week and think of the story and how I was going to illustrate it and what activity we're going to do, and is there a snack that kind of ties into this in a funny way, or something that I can give them to take with them to remind them. And that was so fun for me, because the Bible stories, you don't have to necessarily with children study intensely to teach that Bible class, but you have to do other things intently.
Right.
But it was so fun for me to try to find what fit. Find somebody else's craft that can think things like that up and do it. They thought it was me.
Yeah.
They thought it was me thinking of all these things, and really I just gathered other people's stuff.
And that's what makes you a good teacher, because you were doing some research and you were finding what works and what's fun and what's going to help them remember your main points, what's going to help them remember the story. It's when you just want to stand up and read what the book tells you to do that you kind of start getting stale. But that's perfect. Perfect.
One thing about the discipline in class, sometimes some kids just need a little extra attention. And if you can say, I'm going to let you be my helper today, and you hand out the papers for me, or you get the crayons, or and designate different jobs for those problem children, something to help you, that will a lot of times take care of that excess energy and get them their helpers, and that that means a lot to them. And so sometimes that helps when you have a discipline problem.
And the boy I was talking about that was in 4th grade, when I took him out in the hall, I said to him, I said, I love you. And I said, but I don't like the way you're behaving. And because I love you, I want you to be a better person, and I want you to be better at church and better at school and learn more. And this boy didn't have a lot of people giving him that kind of insight into discipline. And I think he really appreciated knowing, hey, I'm going to hold you to a standard because I expect this of you, because I love you and I care about you. And I can tell you, I saw a difference in that kid from that day. And now other teachers told me it didn't make any difference for them. But when he was in my class, I didn't have, every now and then I have to say, hey, settle down. And he'd say, okay. But, sometimes kids just need to know that you care enough to discipline, because they're not getting that at home. It's just not happening. They know they're loved, but nobody loves them enough to give them the discipline they need.
Yeah, and sometimes just by switching chairs or assigning chairs, that would have discipline problems.
Yeah. He had to sit by me for the hours. I had to put him on one side and the little girl on the other. I guarantee Shirley knows the two I'm talking about. And throw a third one in there that was almost as bad. It was a really fun quarter. Let me tell you.
At least it wasn't a life sentence.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you for your attention. I hope you've gotten something out of the lesson. Well, have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.